Hello friends, welcome back. If you're a fan of the channel, then you already know, and you're probably well aware that, what are Spartans and their origins? Well, I find though that little thought is paid to the implications and the decision making behind their creation. Join me in this episode of Halo X-Files, where we take a deep look at whether Spartans were a secret eugenics program envisioned by Dr. Halsey and what the ramifications of that will be. You may be wondering, what exactly is eugenics and why is it so bad? Well, more or less, it means using tools, methods, or discriminative selection to try and select the best genes to improve the genetic quality of humanity. And yeah, that might even sound a little bit ideal at first. I mean, why wouldn't we try to remove diseases, ailments, defects, or disorders so that our children are better and healthier? Well, it doesn't help that history has shown that it's typically used for, really bad purposes. One of the most relevant examples was the eugenics programs utilized by the Nazis. Yes, literal Nazis. But let's step back for a second and explore how it really started. The term itself was coined by Francis Galton, a half-cousin of Darwin. Yes, the evolution Darwin. He wanted to take Darwin's lessons about evolution in the process and apply it to humanity. His thought process, if evolutionary pressures can make a snow rabbit have white fur so it blends in, then why don't we artificially pressure humans to be taller, more athletic, healthier? In this period of late 1800s and early 1900s, it didn't have the stigma it does today. It was studied academically. I mean, shoot, it was even supported, including in the United States. However, it was quickly seized upon by racists, like legitimate actual racists, to argue why things like immigration shouldn't be allowed because it would, finger quotes, dilute the American, British, European, insert nationality gene pool. You can see why and how things would quickly go south. The worst example, like I mentioned, was Nazi Germany. They wanted to create their ideal Aryan race, and I think just about everyone is familiar with that, so I won't belabor it. But here's some other examples that may have not been so obvious. Did you know that, in the United States and America, even now you can be sterilized with dubious consent? Granted, that was changed in 1978, the federal sterilization regulations did go out of the way, having been passed, to kind of underline rights that people have when it comes to sterilization. Because prior to that point, men and women, they were being sterilized involuntarily. I mean, that when they looked at it between 1907 and 1963, approximately 64,000 individuals were involuntarily sterilized. And where it takes a really dark turn is that many of these sterilizations were done on black women or immigrants without consent. People saw it as a means of reducing minority populations by preventing them from having children, and what they saw as a selection of desirable traits. Much of this has stopped, but it still exists, particularly in the prison environment. It's supposed to be consented to and obviously an informed decision, but you can imagine how that isn't working out. It doesn't stop there though. Many recent medical advances have given us the ability to detect genetic defects early in pregnancy. This leads to the decision on whether or not you want to go ahead with that. I'm being vague here because obviously I don't want YouTube to drop the hammer on me for using the A word. Obviously this is very controversial, with some in favor because it could reduce or eliminate defects and others opposed because of what the solution entails. Again, the A word. Not all is doom and gloom though. Genetic engineering is also showing promise where instead of using a destructive form of selection, we can engineer a child's genetics to be healthy. The downside? Well, it's probably going to be really expensive. And when you think about that on a grander scale, that's going to lead to alienation and poor populations. Not just in developed nations, when we talk about developing countries, imagine the gap in capability between them and societies that have the means to remove ailments, disorders, increase the intelligence and strength. I mean, if you want to see a good movie that kind of captures this, look at Gattaca. So all that said, how does this relate to Spartans in Halo? Well, it's simple really. Spartans were more or less a eugenics program. They were selected discriminatively as children because of their traits, strength, charisma, intelligence. They were then modified both through genetic engineering and through augmentations to be significantly superior to normal humans, especially physically. It's shown to us in a positive light because in the original trilogy it's seen as a necessary sacrifice to combat the Covenant. It's interesting, 343 in their own new games has actually introduced those narratives that cast a shadow on the program, particularly with Dr. Halsey having been the mastermind behind it being investigated and arrested. She was always a bit of a megalomaniac, as is Cortana, who was inspired by her. She was known for being difficult to work with, keeping her secrets, and not really trusting authority. But she was working with Oni's blessings when she created the Spartan 2 program. The narrative obviously changed, as it tends to do post-war, to frame her as kind of a scientist gone mad. But the creation, utilization, ultimately the replacement of the Spartan 2s, that was all accepted by Oni, and it really did a number on the perception of her. As you can imagine, there's a lot of politics in play. Spartan 2s were her creation, and their follow-ons, particularly 4s, were not. So by the time we get to Halo 4, she's seen as a war criminal. The program by Spartan 2 is seen as morally flawed, using kids, flash clones, and indoctrinating them. Again, all of it ironic because it led to humanity's survival, and it was sponsored by UNSC and ONI. But an interesting thing though is when it comes to Halsey, she really did believe in her Spartans, to the point that by the time of Halo 4, she sees them as humanity's future, their next step, destiny as a species. She's no longer, oh, they're just here to fight the Covenant. It's a little bit more than that, and it sounds awfully like eugenics. And while it may sound like that, well, in reality, Spartan 2s cannot have children. Nor do they really want to, outside of the TV show, Master Cheeks. Spartans are known to not have sex drives and by most means are sterile because of the augmentations that they've had. So while Halsey sees them as the future, Spartan 2s will eventually die out. However, Spartan 4s, on the other hand, well, they're here to stay. Not only that, but like I said, politics, they fall under a new command separate from Halsey. They're selected from grown adults and preteens and teenagers. They're augmented to be superior. These new augmentations, well, there's no discussions on them being sterile, nor do they show the lack of humanity, if you will, of Spartan 2s. The UNSC is, well, making a ton of them, more than the quantity of 2s or 3s. These new Spartans are selected for their strong physique before even being augmented. It's eugenics, but under the pretense of military necessity. That said, unlike the eugenics here in the real world, the UNSC does not seem to be discriminating against races or the ethnicities. Anybody can be a Spartan 4. They're just discriminating against those they see as smaller, weaker, or less intelligent, which still sounds pretty bad. Worse yet, the UNSC has not really thought about the ramifications of all this. 343 hints at this. They had a lore drop in a cannon fodder post on their Halo Waypoint where they talk about how neither the UNSC or the United Earth government has planned for what happens when augmented humans rejoin society. They'll be stronger, smarter, just better. Will their kids also inherit some of these traits? Either way, it leads to issues. What happens when the wars end, Spartan 4s get tired of the UEG, and they stage a coup to replace them? Who's going to stand up against Spartans? It opens a can of worms where a portion of the population has been built to be hyper-lethal as a form of humanity that's not possible to create normally. You can't have a kid that will be as gifted as a Spartan 4. It gets worse, like I said, what happens when they have children? Obviously, some of those purpose-made augmentations can't be passed on, but the genetic selection and engineering, well, that might actually go down to their kids, making them gifted amongst their peers. Well, what happens in 100 years when there's a class of humans descended from Spartan 4s, or that have been further augmented, dwarfing those that are born normally? It's not really a race issue like eugenics here in the modern world, but it does become a military caste class issue, if you will, and the haves versus the have-nots. You'll never be, able to match the power of the military caste or their descendants. People already think, the ONI and UNSC are quasi-fascists. Well, hold on to your seats, because in the wrong direction, given a little bit of time, and they'll rewrite what, worst case fascism looks like. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining another episode of Halo's X-Files. We break down some of the weirder and darker elements of the game franchise. Spartans are close to my heart, and I imagine that's true for a lot of us. They're a key to the franchise. They make what Halo is. But the ramifications of the creation is really just starting to be understood. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a fantastic week. I'll see y'all later.